Welcome back, or if this is your first time here, welcome. This is a space for stories that matter. No fluff, no noise, just myths and the quiet patterns they reveal. We don't come to these ancient stories looking for inspiration or life lessons. We come to see what they actually are. Early human technologies for making sense of chaos, for organizing societies, for answering questions that don't have clean answers. Some of what we find is beautiful. Some of it is uncomfortable. Tonight's episode falls into the second category. We're going to examine how classical myths enforce roles, how they prioritize order over individual freedom, how they use stories to keep people in place. This isn't spiritual, it isn't uplifting, but it's true. And sometimes, late at night, truth is more useful than comfort. So settle in. Let the world quiet down around you. And let's look at something we usually prefer not to see. Opening orientation. Classical myths don't often celebrate flexibility. We read them today looking for transformation, for heroes who grow and change, for journeys that lead somewhere meaningful. But the myths themselves are interested in something else. They're interested in stability. In these stories, people wear roles like masks: hero, king, outcast, heir. And once the mask is on, it doesn't come off easily. When someone stumbles, when they fail to perform their role correctly, the story doesn't pause to explore how they feel about it. It doesn't validate their struggle or offer them space to heal. Instead, it asks, how does the system survive? Because that's what matters in these myths. Not personal growth, not individual fulfillment, but collective continuity. The person exists to stabilize the group. And when the person falters, the group responds. Not with empathy, with correction. Tonight, we're going to sit with three figures caught inside this logic: Heracles, Agamemnon, Oedipus. Each one trapped inside a role they cannot escape. Each one performing a function the community demands. This is not about redemption. It's not about wisdom gained through suffering. It's about how societies use stories to fix people into place. And if you pay attention, you'll notice something uncomfortable. We still do this. The names have changed, the settings have changed, but the pattern remains. We still assign roles. We still demand performance. We still expect people to stabilize systems at their own expense. The mask that does not bend. Let's see how it works. Section 1. The hero who cannot stop. In many Greek myths, suffering is not personal. It's structural. When something breaks, when someone acts outside their assigned role, the story doesn't treat it as individual tragedy. It treats it as a system malfunction. And systems, when they malfunction, have ways of restoring balance. Consider Heracles. He's born the son of Zeus, marked for greatness. His strength is beyond human, his destiny clear. He is meant to be a hero. The community expects it, the story demands it. And for a while, everything proceeds as it should. But then Hera intervenes. Still furious over Zeus's infidelity, she drives Heracles into madness. And in that madness, he does the unthinkable. He kills his own wife and children. When the madness lifts, he's standing in the wreckage, surrounded by the people he loved most, gone because of him. This is the rupture. The hero has become a murderer. The strong protector has become a threat. The role has cracked wide open, and what's underneath is unbearable. In a modern story, this might be where healing begins, where Heracles withdraws, processes his grief, seeks some kind of reconciliation with what he's done. But that's not what happens. The community steps in, not to comfort him, to redirect him. Eurystheus, the king of Tyrants, assigns him 12 labors, impossible tasks: kill the Nemean lion, capture the Erymanthian boar, clean the Augean stables in a single day, retrieve the golden apples from the edge of the world. These aren't punishments exactly, they're reassignments. The hero role is empty, it must be filled. And Heracles, despite his crime, is still the only one strong enough to fill it. So his grief becomes irrelevant, his trauma becomes secondary. What matters is that he continue to function, that his strength continue to serve the community's needs. He doesn't choose this. Redemption is not something he pursues because he wants to heal. It's imposed, assigned, required. And so he labors, for years. The story doesn't pause to ask how he feels during this time, whether he forgives himself, whether he finds peace. It only tracks whether he completes the tasks. And he does, one after another, each labor more difficult than the last, each one absorbing more of his strength, more of his life, until there's almost nothing left of him but the role itself. Think about what this means. The myth is not interested in Heracles as a person. It's interested in Heracles as a function. Can he still perform heroic deeds? Can his strength still be directed toward communal ends? If yes, then he continues. If no, then the system finds someone else. But there is no option where he simply stops, where he lays down the burden and says, "I have given enough," because the system doesn't recognize enough. It recognizes function and dysfunction, useful and not useful. And as long as Heracles is functional, he labors. We see this pattern everywhere, even now. The brilliant colleague who burns out but keeps working because the team depends on them. The parent who sacrifices endlessly because the family requires it. The leader who performs strength long after they've run out of reserves. The role demands occupation, and the person wearing the role learns that their own needs are secondary. Eventually, Heracles dies, not peacefully, not surrounded by loved ones in a moment of closure. He dies in agony, poisoned, his body finally giving out. Even his death is violent. Even his death is part of the labor, because the hero role doesn't allow for gentle endings. It uses you until you're spent. And then the story moves on. The system survives. The individual does not. And somehow, we still tell these stories as if they're about triumph. Section 2. The King Who Cannot Yield. Not all roles are enforced through labor. Some are enforced through performance. In ancient Greece, authority was not a private quality. It was something displayed, performed, maintained through constant visible reinforcement. Kings didn't rule because they had some inner legitimacy. They ruled because they could convince others of their legitimacy, through gestures, through decisions, through the careful construction of an image that could not be questioned. And if that image cracked, the authority dissolved. This is where Agamemnon's story becomes instructive. Agamemnon leads the Greek forces at Troy. He's the commander of a coalition, rival kings, each with their own pride, their own claims to honor. His authority is fragile, contested, maintained moment by moment, and then something threatens it. A priest named Chryses arrives. His daughter Chryseis has been taken as a war prize, given to Agamemnon. Chryses offers a ransom, generous, respectful. He invokes Apollo, whose priest he is. The army murmurs approval. Returning the girl seems reasonable, fair. But Agamemnon refuses, not because he loves the girl, not because he needs her, but because yielding publicly would crack the mask. To return her in response to a priest's plea in front of the assembled army is to show deference. And deference in this context looks like weakness. It suggests that someone else's claim can override his, that his authority is conditional, so he doubles down. He keeps the girl, dismisses the priest. And when Apollo sends a plague in retaliation, when the army starts dying, Agamemnon still refuses to yield, not until the situation becomes catastrophic. And even then, his concession is not graceful. He agrees to return Chryseis, but immediately demands compensation, Achilles' war prize, Briseis. He doesn't want her. He wants the gesture. The visible reassertion that his authority remains intact. Achilles is enraged. He withdraws from battle. The campaign falters. Nestor, the elder statesman, tries to mediate. He appeals for compromise, for unity, but his counsel fails, because what he's asking, implicitly, is for Agamemnon to step off the stage, to remove the mask, to admit that his authority is not absolute. And Agamemnon cannot do that, not because he's cruel, not because he doesn't see the cost, but because authority in this world is performance, and the performance cannot stop. Every decision is not just about the matter at hand. It's about what kind of leader he appears to be, what kind of authority he can claim the next time. If he yields once, he sets a precedent. The army sees that appeals can sway him, that his will is negotiable, and once that precedent exists, his authority begins to dissolve. This is the trap of performed leadership. The mask must remain intact, even when flexibility would serve everyone better, even when the cost becomes obvious, because the danger is not being wrong, the danger is being seen without authority. Agamemnon sacrifices unity, strategy, the lives of his men, all to maintain the image, and we recognize this, don't we? The manager who cannot admit a mistake because it would undermine their position. The institution that doubles down on a failing policy rather than appear uncertain. The leader who performs confidence long after they've lost the thread. The mask becomes more important than the face beneath it. Agamemnon knows on some level that his refusal is costly, that it's damaging the campaign, that it's turning his best warrior against him. But he also knows that if he removes the mask, if he steps off the stage and shows vulnerability, the authority might never return. So he performs, until the performance leads him home, where his wife, Clytemnestra, still remembers what he did to their daughter at Aulis, still remembers the sacrifice he made to launch this war, and she kills him, not in battle, not with honor, in his own palace, in his bath, trapped and defenseless. The mask he maintained so carefully at Troy cannot protect him at home, because performance in the end is only performance, and eventually someone sees through it. Before we continue, I want to tell you about something that's been on my mind lately. This channel exists because we believe patterns matter, that seeing how systems work, how roles get assigned, how structures persist, actually changes how we move through the world. There's a team doing similar work, but in cities instead of myths. Urban Gurus of the South is a small research consultancy working on the patterns that lock urban systems in place. Housing finance that doesn't reach the people who need it. Governance, structures that look good on paper, but fracture under pressure. Regeneration projects that promise transformation, but repeat the same failures. They work upstream, where evidence and diagnostics can actually shift what happens downstream. Not construction, not implementation. Just the clarity that makes better decisions possible in cities that can't afford to keep getting it wrong. If you work in urban development, housing policy, or spatial governance, especially in the global south, check them out. urbangurus.co.za. All right, back to the myths. Let's talk about what happens when your identity isn't something you choose, but something others decide for you. Section 3. The man who cannot escape. Some people are not trapped by what they do. They're trapped by what others decide they are. Identity, in these myths, is not self-determined. It's not something cultivated from within. It's reflected, assigned, repeated by the community until it hardens into something inescapable. Oedipus understands this better than anyone. He starts with a choice, an intention. He hears a prophecy that he will kill his father and marry his mother, and he decides to escape it. He leaves Corinth, leaves the people he believes are his parents. He walks away from the future the oracle described. This is agency, refusal. He will not become what the prophecy says he is. But the world doesn't allow that refusal to stand. At a crossroads, he encounters an older man. There's a dispute, a moment of violence. Oedipus kills him. He doesn't know the man is Laius, his biological father. He doesn't know the prophecy has already begun. He continues to Thebes. He solves the riddle of the Sphinx. The city, grateful, offers him the throne, and the widowed queen Jocasta as his wife. He accepts. He believes he's acting freely, making his own choices. But the community begins to name him differently, through oracles, through Tiresias, through Creon, the cursed, the polluted, the killer of his father, the husband of his mother. Each accusation is a form of labeling, not a discovery of hidden truth, but an assignment of identity. The community decides what Oedipus is, and that decision gets repeated until it becomes undeniable. Oedipus resists. He argues. He demands proof. but the evidence accumulates. Witness testimonies, the recognition, the slow, terrible alignment of facts, and finally, he stops resisting. He blinds himself, not as punishment from the gods, not as divine retribution, but as a final act of alignment with the identity the community has constructed. He becomes what they have said he is, the cursed king, the man who must be expelled to restore order. This is what the looking-glass self does in mythology. It doesn't reflect who we believe we are. It reflects who others have decided we are. And once that reflection is repeated enough times, it becomes the only identity available. Oedipus didn't discover the truth, he was assigned it. And once assigned, he had no choice but to inhabit it. We see this pattern constantly. The person labeled difficult, who eventually becomes difficult because that's the only role left open to them. The child told they're not good at math, who internalizes that identity and stops trying. The employee marked as not leadership material, who watches opportunities pass them by, one after another, until the label becomes self-fulfilling. The community decides, the individual resists, and eventually the resistance exhausts itself, because the mirror is stronger than the face looking into it. Oedipus could have continued to insist on his innocence. He could have refused the label, but the community had already decided. The prophet had spoken, the evidence had aligned, and in that world, personal conviction means nothing against communal judgment, so he accepts it. He blinds himself, he leaves Thebes, not because he wants to, but because the identity assigned to him allows for nothing else. Once the mirror hardens, agency disappears, and the person becomes the reflection. Section 4. The path that locks itself. When roles harden and performances must continue and identities are assigned, something else happens. Early decisions begin to close off alternatives. This is not fate in the mystical sense. It's something more mechanical. Once a system is set in motion, once a choice is made, a role assigned, a performance begun, the range of possible outcomes narrows. Not because the future is written, but because each step constrains what comes next. Consider Agamemnon at Aulis. The Greek fleet is ready, assembled, waiting to sail to Troy. But the winds don't blow. Days pass. Morale deteriorates. The seer Calchas delivers his verdict. Artemis is offended. She demands a sacrifice, Iphigenia, Agamemnon's daughter. Agamemnon hesitates. He's a father. He loves her. But he's also a commander. The army is watching. The coalition is fragile. If he refuses, the campaign collapses. His authority dissolves, so he makes a choice. He sends for Iphigenia. He performs the sacrifice. This is the first step, and it determines everything that follows. Because once Iphigenia is dead, Agamemnon's relationship with Clytemnestra is no longer salvageable. She does not forgive, she waits. And when he returns from Troy, victorious, she kills him. The sacrifice at Aulis doesn't directly cause his murder, but it makes his murder possible. It closes off the alternative where reconciliation occurs, where the family remains intact. The path locks itself. The same thing happens to Oedipus. His parents hear a prophecy. Their son will kill his father and marry his mother. Horrified, they decide to prevent it. They expose the infant on a mountainside, expecting him to die. But he doesn't die. A shepherd rescues him. He's adopted by the king and queen of Corinth. This decision, the exposure, doesn't stop the prophecy. It enables it. Because Oedipus, raised in Corinth, doesn't know his true parents. When he hears the prophecy as an adult, he flees Corinth, believing he's escaping fate. But in fleeing, he runs directly toward it. The initial attempt to prevent the outcome becomes the mechanism that ensures it. And for Heracles, the pattern is even clearer. His madness creates a rupture. The labors are assigned to restore balance, but the labors don't end after 12 tasks. Heracles continues. He fights wars. He serves kings. He labors until his body gives out. There's no moment where the system says, enough. The role, once assigned, becomes permanent. The path, once begun, has no exit. The first step doesn't determine the outcome, but it determines which outcomes remain possible. And in classical mythology, the possible outcomes narrow quickly. Once the system absorbs the individual, once the role is assigned, the performance begun, the label applied, stepping outside becomes nearly impossible. The path locks itself, and the cost of that lock is borne by the person walking it. We still walk these paths. The career we chose at 20 that defines us at 40. The relationship pattern we learned early that repeats itself endlessly. The role we were assigned in our family that we cannot seem to escape, no matter how far we move or how much we change. The first step didn't doom us, but it narrowed the field, and each step after that narrowed it further, until the path we're on feels less like a choice and more like an inevitability. This is what the myths show us, not fate, but constraint. The way early decisions ripple forward, the way systems, once activated, resist change, the way the path, once chosen, begins to choose for us. In closing, these myths don't ask whether the individual is fulfilled. They don't wonder if Heracles found peace, or if Agamemnon felt justified, or if Oedipus understood himself more deeply. They ask whether the system survives. And when the system survives, the cost is often borne by one person. Heracles labors until death. Agamemnon sacrifices his daughter and is murdered by his wife. Oedipus blinds himself and wanders in exile. Each of them absorbs the shock of deviation. Each of them stabilizes the collective by bearing the weight alone. This is not presented as unjust. It's presented as necessary. Because in classical mythology, order matters more than agency. Continuity matters more than choice. The mask must remain intact, even when the face beneath it is breaking. These stories don't celebrate freedom. They acknowledge it exists. They show that people can resist, can attempt to escape, can try to redefine themselves. But they also show that resistance is absorbed. That escape leads back to the origin. That redefinition is overruled by communal judgment. In classical mythology, freedom is real. It's just less important than order. And the myths, in their quiet, relentless way, demonstrate this again and again. The hero returns to his labors. The king maintains his mask. The cursed man accepts his curse. Not because they want to, but because the system requires it. And the system always survives. Before you drift, these explorations will continue. Each week, a new lens, a new pattern. Sometimes we'll look at ancient myths, like tonight. Sometimes we'll examine modern ones, the stories we tell ourselves about productivity, success, rest, control. All of it examined the same way, quietly, without fluff, without noise, just the patterns and the space to see them clearly. If this resonates, if you want to continue this conversation, subscribe. New episodes arrive weekly. No pressure, no urgency, just an invitation to return when you're ready. The next story is waiting. Until then, let the thoughts settle. Let the mind rest. Sleep well.